And good afternoon and welcome. I see some folks are still joining, so the more the merrier. We're going to go ahead and get started in the interest of time. My name is Nicole Siegel, and I am the Deputy Director of Education at Third Way. We're delighted to have you join us today for an important and timely conversation about student well-being, belonging, and success in higher education. Since the start of the pandemic, our team has been hosting regular digital briefings with various stakeholders and influencers to learn how COVID-19 has impacted our nation's higher education community. All of the previous conversations are available to view on our website. May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and now more than ever, our team is thinking a lot about college students across the country. Stories portrayed in the media showed that campus closures and the pivot to online learning exacerbated inequities in our nation's higher education system, with some students shifting their post-secondary plans altogether. But a lesser known story is about how college students' mental health has been negatively impacted by the pandemic. Over the last few months, a whole host of reports have been released, highlighting frightening statistics about the decline in the mental health of college students, resulting in questions about what colleges and universities can do to support their students' mental health and wellness moving forward, and what the correlation is between student well-being and academic success. So that's what we're going to dive into today. Before we formally kick off the conversation, I want to first go over a few logistical details regarding today's run of show. First, the hope is for everyone on today's call to have the opportunity to ask questions, which you can do using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. I have a few of my own questions prepared, which we'll run through first and then save plenty of time at the end for Q&A. I also want to note that this conversation is on the record and is being recorded. So if there are things you miss or will want to reference again, you will be able to do so at a link that will be posted on Third Way's website later this week. So without further delay, I'd like to introduce our esteemed guests. First, we have Chynna Lloyd. Hi, Chynna. Chynna is an outreach and training fellow at Young Invincibles, a nonprofit organization whose mission is to amplify the voices of young adults in the political process and expand economic opportunity for our generation. And more importantly, and the reason I'm so thrilled she's here to join us today, is she has just graduated from California State University at Northridge. Congrats, Chynna. What an unbelievable coup, especially during the pandemic. Next, we have Dr. Mesmin Destin. Mesmin is an associate professor of psychology at Northwestern University, where he studies the ways that socioeconomic environments influence cognition and motivation. He is particularly interested in young people's perceptions of resources and opportunities, which can guide their identities, everyday behaviors, and educational outcomes. And last but not least, Andrew Gumbel is an award-winning journalist and author with a long track record as an investigative reporter. His latest book, Won't Lose This Dream: How an Upstart Urban University Rewrote the Rules of a Broken System, tells the powerful story of Georgia State University and the work they've done to transform the outcomes of their low-income students. Andrew, Chynna, Mesmin, thank you so much for being here today. So let's jump right in. This is a question for all of you. The pandemic brought the concept of student well-being into the spotlight, but it's evident that term means different things to different people. How do you define student well-being in higher education? And how can this concept be connected to good student outcomes like college completion? Anyone can start first. I can call on you like we're in the classroom. Chynna, you're up.
Okay, I was just making sure because sometimes you chime in and somebody else chimes in with you. Haven't seen a lot. I can honestly say well-being, I feel like it took on a totally different and new meaning this year. In years before, I was focusing on making sure I got along with roommates so I can focus on studying. But like this year, I had to make sure I was healthy, that my mom and siblings were healthy, that I kept my job while maintaining good grades. It's been a lot. And a recent Insider in Higher Ed opinions piece penned by health and wellness coordinator at a school in Richmond, Virginia, had made the case for why colleges should be responsible for mental health of their students, and in doing so suggested colleges and universities require all incoming students take for credit mental health courses in high schools as a mandatory component for the admissions process. So, I'm sorry, I'm reading your thing.
Andrew, I see you're
Well,
unmuted.
one thing that I've learned, I mean, I should just introduce myself to everybody. I'm not a mental health expert. I'm not even a higher education expert by temperament. I'm somebody who went and looked very closely at what's going on at one university, but in the process also sort of looked at the whole question of what is the university system for? How does it serve students? How does it fail students many times? And what can be done about it? And I think, you know, a big overarching concept here is that the concept that if a student is deemed to be good enough to get into university, then it then becomes the university's responsibility as much as the students to make sure that they get the support they need to get to the end. And I think that overarching concept often is not there. There's this idea that at many universities, you know, you're let in, there are all these great courses, all these great majors, and you're kind of on your own. And, you know, especially in a crisis like COVID, where people felt much more on their own than they normally would. They're not on campus, they're not surrounded by their peers, they don't have easy access to counselors, to professors, and so on and so forth. You know, this idea of it's about the institution wrapping itself around you as much as it is you being the consumer, taking your pick of what's on offer. That's a crucial concept. And I think COVID has heightened the urgency for understanding the universities need to change their mindset. And, you know, regardless of whether they're catering to, you know, rich kids who have parents who went to college for generations, or whether it's first-time students who come from, you know, tough backgrounds, not a lot of money to spare, really struggling to get to the finish line before they run out of time and money. You know, that concept has to be constant, and it needs to be a fundamental shift from where we are right now.
Yeah, I'll add my perspective. I agree with everything that that we've heard. I was trained as a social psychologist, and so this idea of well-being is sort of a broad concept in our field, but it pertains to being both in good mental health and in physical health. And in our work, we really emphasize the importance of a strong sense of identity. And that can mean things like feeling secure in who you are, feeling a sense of direction and purpose in what matters to you. And I think really importantly, especially in this college context, we're talking about feeling connected to valued relationships and communities and resources. And all of these aspects of well-being are deeply predictive and important for student outcomes, motivation, achievement. And I think there are a couple of things that are important to note here. One is that all of this is shaped by and guided by the learning environments where students find themselves, the sense of all these pieces to well-being and identities. And that further, it's important to acknowledge that how well these environments support students' identities and well-being, and ultimately their health and achievement really vary systematically based on their socioeconomic background and their race in particular. And, you know, we often find that the institutions don't validate the students' identities and experiences in ways that could support well-being and more effectively, particularly for students from groups that are facing marginalization in society.
Thank you. So this was mentioned a little bit, and I would assume this has changed tremendously over the last year plus, but curious to hear what you think about how much responsibility, if any, colleges should bear for the mental health and well-being of their students. And I would think about this kind of pre and post pandemic, right? So pandemic just potentially magnified the struggles that students face on a college campus, and you know the need for support. But what do you all think about generally in terms of the role that colleges play in supporting students?
Well, I can give the perspective from Georgia State because I asked them this question in anticipation of this panel. And, you know, their attitude is very much they see things through the prism of, you know, what is going to help students succeed. That is their mission. That is their responsibility. That if you start going down the road of we have to make up for the deficiencies in society at large for availability of mental health counseling, that's a very tough assignment to set yourself, and you're probably going to fail. So what they do is, you know, if there's a sense of, you know, there's obviously a need for mental health counseling, they have a counseling center, but they also think about, you know, what could be provoking these problems. So they have a committee that has input from advising, from housing, from financial aid, to sort of try and understand if a student's in trouble, which piece of the puzzle they can help, get them to a place where they're, in a better position to keep going and to ultimately graduate. The other thing that Chynna mentioned, this idea of having some kind of requirement, whether that's for high schools to provide, some kind of mental health input, or whether it's for students to take some kind of mental health test for credit. Again, from a student success perspective, it makes them very nervous to have any kind of obstacle, one more thing you need to do in order to get into college. And the practical outcome of those kinds of obstacles tends to be that the students that are most vulnerable, which means those from poorer backgrounds, those from minorities, all the usual suspects, those are the ones who tend to struggle the most with those obstacles. And often it can be, a good intention to try and help those people, you end up excluding them because you're putting one more obstacle in their way. They have to get inoculation shots. That's a challenge for some people, not for others. They have to get, all those other, fill in FAFSA, whatever it is. If they then have to get the mental health piece as well, that's one more reason not to show up on the first day.
Yeah, I can add to that. I do think that institutions, colleges, universities should be motivated to take as much responsibility as they can for the well-being of their students, for a number of reasons, probably in two different buckets. The first bucket is just sort of the ethical responsibility piece, right? The sort of the care for the development of people who are investing in the institution and living in oftentimes and learning within those institutions. Trying to create a community of care, I think, is important on its surface, but also I think more in this pragmatic sense, in that this is a way to encourage not only to sort of traditional success, getting students through, but to really elevate to a new level of success and innovation when your students are truly at a level of health and well-being. They're able to contribute and to excel and to extend the innovation of what learning can look like in ways that go beyond what could ever be possible if you're not attending to well-being through investing in the traditional sources of counseling and the like as much as possible, which are usually underfunded, but also just thinking about all these other spaces where students are supported. And I mean, there are many different innovations that I think matter, but also there are so many things that are working but aren't supported for creating strong student communities and to reinforce the different ways and spaces where students feel connected and supported.
I kind of want to put out as an example, Colorado's Department of Higher Education, in partnership with YHI, had recently released a Healthy Minds checklist. And the Healthy Minds checklist aims to create inclusive programs that enhance existing college campus resources and benefit both students and institutions at higher education. So this program that could be replicated in other states or colleges implemented programs that meet checklist requirements. Schools would provide like a wide range of support services for students and earn a Healthy Minds designation. And we're already seeing innovation in the mental health services available at certain campuses, including virtual services, free mental health screenings, and counseling sessions, easier access information, and increasing data collection on the needs of students. What the checklist aims to do is amplify these existing services and make them accessible for all students across all institutions in Colorado. And some examples of those program recommendations include mental health services on the syllabus for students and IDs, and offer prevention programs that could focus on intervention. Hold awareness events on campus each year, provide avenues to access online mental health support and connect students to community resources, evidence-based mental health training for faculty and staff, and offer free and confidential mental health screenings.
That's awesome. Thanks for flagging, Chynna. And I saw Emmy just dropped into the chat the link to that checklist if folks want to dig into that a little bit more. That's a great resource. So I think that's a nice segue, Chynna. I'm going to direct a question specifically to you. So as I mentioned at the beginning, you just graduated, although ceremony is in like a week or so, but we're going to congratulate you now, from Cal State Northridge, first in your family. Huge congratulations. Inquiring minds want to know, tell us a little bit more about what your experience was like finishing out your degree in the middle of a pandemic. What anticipated challenges were there? And as much as you're comfortable disclosing, how did the unprecedented changes of the past year impact your mental health and the well-being of you and your peers?
It was stressful, but honestly, in my home, I feel like it has been difficult because you're always on the computer, and outside of like obvious Wi-Fi issues that I'm sure we all have, because I for sure had them. As a first generation college student, my mom is an immigrant, so she doesn't always understand me being on the computer all the time, is being in school. And in general, just being overwhelmed about assignments, always worrying about just so many different things, and being overstimulated by always having to be online. It's just very difficult. It also just feels like teachers added additional coursework to compensate for us not being in person. So I feel like my workload has just doubled during COVID, and I don't understand why professors felt the need to do this at this time. And I feel like that has definitely affected my mental health, other students, like being in just different peer group chats and seeing other students just stressed out, going through the same issues. Yeah, it's been a lot.
Thank you. So Mesmin, want to turn to you now. We have been lucky enough to partner with you on elevating some of your great research. Would love to hear from you. What has your research found about the correlation between psychological factors and student success? And what role do you see the pandemic playing in evolving this body of research?
Yeah, thanks. I think, when we look at the insights from small scale experiments, which we run a lot of, in addition to large scale studies that collaborators are a part of and teams are a part of, they tend to converge on some of the same types of findings. And, the more that students' identities, their goals, particular types of mindsets and feelings of belonging are supported, the more likely they are to persist and succeed. And the correlations are significant. They're often, we have sort of causal evidence of these different pathways, and they're comparable in size to, several other kind of long accepted types of factors that we intuitively think of as shaping student outcomes, like different sorts of resources. And often are the pathways through which student resources matters, through the way that they're experienced psychologically for students. But these don't come out of nowhere. When we talk about psychological factors, I like to emphasize, especially as a psychologist, that we should really center the environments and how they're structured, because those are ultimately shaping the students' experiences, all the way from and the environments at the climate level, the types of financial resources available, to what faculty are doing and the different types of developmental and learning experiences faculty have, and so that we don't see the types of experiences that Chynna was sort of alluding to. And then all these different parts of the peer learning environment as well are important to take into account. And I think the pandemic, as you mentioned, has the potential to shift educators and researchers to really center the student experience a little bit more, and to acknowledge that students are parts of home communities, that you kind of are forced to see that they are coming with a connection to important communities that they can't be fully separated from. And that's a reality that is harder and harder for people to ignore, but rather to embrace that these are communities that are important to people and part of them learning and growing, and how to bring in all of the expertise and insight and connection that they have from their sort of whole sense of experience. Is something that I hope that people gain from these challenges, is to look more holistically at who students are and to try to connect with their entire experience.
Thank you. Yeah, I see this, and I think we've all seen this as an opportunity, right? Certainly the pandemic has exacerbated existing inequities that those of us that are in the field or kind of parts of these conversations have long known existed. but this feels for me, and I think for others, like a tipping point and a real opportunity to begin to address some of these kind of gaping holes in the system and really, use it to leverage change. So, Andrew, we can't talk about student outcomes without talking about Georgia State. So in your book, you write about one of Tim Rennick. So folks are not familiar, provost at Georgia State, who has really been the leader on a bunch of their transformational student success work. You write about one of his most profound insights, that contrary to conventional wisdom, academic performance was not, in fact, the most important predictor of student success or failure. What did he share was the most important indicator of success? And how did this realization instruct all of the work that Georgia State has done to improve student outcomes?
Thank you so much. So let me just preface it before I come to the answer by just saying this has been a process at Georgia State that started really in the wake of the 2008 recession. So we're talking about a timeline of more than 10 years now. And also by way of very quick introduction, Georgia State is in downtown Atlanta. 50, almost 60 years ago, it was a segregated all-white commuter school. It is now, a top research university. It is one of the most diverse campuses in the country. It graduates more African Americans than any other institution in the country. And as a result of the work they've done, which I'm going to talk about in a second, they have erased all achievement gaps, regardless of income level, minority status. It doesn't matter whether you were a first generation student or not, everybody graduates at the same rate. And this is an unprecedented achievement, and it's got a lot of people's attention, as I'm sure a lot of people listening in on this session know. So one of the early insights was, as you allude, that obviously people have all kinds of different struggles, but the single biggest thing that came out of the data, and Georgia State has been big on data collection, is that you can really measure that for every dollar of unmet need, you are increasing the chances that somebody is not going to make it, that they're going to drop out, not graduate. So it's really all about the money. That was their starting point. And then once you understand that, then it becomes a prism through which you see all the other issues. So if the pressure of having to get on the right track right away, make sure you're in the right major, don't waste any time on the wrong major, make sure you're taking the courses in the right order, make sure you're not you're not getting distracted by something that you think that you need that you don't. And just going in a straight line as fast as you can, because the consequences of not doing that is that you run out of money, either the federal grants, or in Georgia, they have a merit-based scholarship rather than a needs-based one, which increases the pressure on a lot of lower income students. They need to get to the finish line as fast as they can. And a lot of the work that they've done at Georgia State is understanding the inflection points at which students are likely to either succeed or fail, and then doing everything they can to ensure that they stay on track. And some of those things, which we can talk about subsequently, have a very strong psychological component. It's about, students being made to feel they do belong when maybe at other institutions, for a variety of reasons, in a similar situation, they might not. And programs that you can actually measure the outcome that show that there is a psychological impact as much as there is a financial or an academic one.
Thank you. Chynna, I'm going to pitch it back to you. So during your time at Cal State Northridge, you worked as a coordinator for the Wisdom, Women Inspired to Succeed and Discover Opportunities Through Mentoring program on campus. Tell me a little bit more about Wisdom, and would love for you to share a few success stories from the program and talk more broadly about why programs like this are so integral to helping students complete.
Sure. So Wisdom, as you mentioned, it's a mentorship program. It was created and the research behind it was created using the framework, the intersectionality framework from Kimberly Williams Crenshaw. How this program came about was research has showed that 50% of Black female students at CSUN were dropping out of college after their freshman year. Many of them were dropping out due to many reasons, such as financial reasons, sense of belonging, or having a community. It was just so many different aspects that were dropping students out. And there were also at the time some policies that were supposed to help students, but end up being very detrimental to Black student populations at CSUN. Policies such as tiers admissions, at the time, the then placement test, because it's not there no more, in remedial courses. And this was causing many female students to leave. So that's why it got started. So it was a mentorship program where basically it's for Black female students, and they will pair Black female professors with Black female students to help them navigate college, connect them to resources. And then on the side, there was another piece with workshops to basically help them as they navigated college, financial workshops, healing circles, just anything that seemed of interest. There were that was a side component of the program. So when I had coordinated this program at the time, 70% of the students had graduated, which was really great. But most of the students who had just started the program, because the program was very new, were seniors. When I took on this program, basically what I started to do was like heavy outreach stuff, as like going to, especially to freshman students, because that's who you kind of was geared to I feel like to keep in the program. That's who we want to keep in school, because research shows that's who was dropping out. So I did heavy outreach to these students, and I was able to start from like 3 and get to like 40 students. As this program went on, I had connected many of the students. I had connect them with mentors who fit their interests. At first, at the time, they were going just based off majors, but I saw that wasn't working. So I did just different activities to see who connected with each other and was able to pair them up, such as. And then at the time, I held many leadership positions in different organizations. So just me using that, also talking to them, I would just talk to different mentors to get their take on how to better the program, and also different mentees. I was able to do that to speak to these students and see what were their needs at the time, to make sure that the workshops I were implementing were match the needs at the time. Many of them, like I helped find jobs. At the end of the program, many of them were freshmen who had took on leadership positions in just different clubs that I kind of just was like, okay, well, I'll connect you. Just different connections at the time. So I feel like that was very helpful, because a lot of them were like, when you're a freshman coming in, at least for me as a first generation college student, nobody teaches you how to navigate college. No one shows you how to get through all these different systems, or just find resources that you need. And this program, I feel like it was really good in helping first generation college students, to show them, especially low income first generation college students, because that's what I was. It shows them how to navigate, how to not get overwhelmed. And I feel like it showed them that someone cared, because they had all these different mentors who were coming out to support them at all their events, connecting them and guiding them to do great things. And that's why I feel like this program was very integral, as you said, because like I said, no one navigates you, I feel like, when you come into college. And that's very important. I feel like for a first generation college student, you need to know how to be able to get what you need, and you know how to be successful, how to be able to talk to professors, how to navigate using office hours. And by having a mentor who may have even been a professor, or even can connect you to different resources, different professors, even show you different majors. You have people who struggle with that and they end up changing, like those type of things are integral, because they help these students navigate, because the idea is to finish, right? Let you know that give you a sense of community, help you, teach you to be independent, and also get your degree. So that's why.
Can I ask you a question, Chynna? Just, was there any sense from the administration at CSUN that they were a little embarrassed that they weren't doing this themselves? And maybe, from your perspective, did you ever have a sense with your organization, this is something the institution should be doing as a matter of course, and we're stepping in because they're not doing it?
I definitely think so, because the program was, it was funded through a grant, campus grant. And part of the research kind of showed, like, told the institutions, you're not doing enough. This is too many students dropping out at high rates, like 50%, like, and the Black students only make up 5% of the population, the research definitely showed it was something you can see even on the website. Like that was something that was brought to me, like you're not doing enough. And part of that's reason why they gave us a campus. There's a grant for campus, and that was funding the program just so it could stay. So I definitely do think so.
This is the benefit to having an investigative journalist on the panel. I'm not the only one asking questions. I should just
I'll
grab
try
a
and rein it in a little
cocktail
bit.
and lean back. So I'm going to ask one more question to Andrew and Mesmin, but folks should feel free to start. I see we already have one submitting their own questions into the Q&A, and we will move to that shortly. Mesmin, I'm going to save your question till the last, but Andrew, for you, we had the opportunity to connect late last year. I read the book, I loved it. I think for folks that are in kind of the higher education world, Georgia State is not new to them. This institution has in many ways kind of received gold star, blue ribbon for all of the unbelievable work they have done. But what struck me so much about reading your book, and what I found most fascinating was kind of the lesser known story and the red thread throughout that was really talking about prioritizing this piece of student belonging. So curious to hear from you, how did Georgia State work to put the needs of students first during these groundbreaking reforms, right? So introducing the chat box and, the kind of intensely available academic advising, and then how are other colleges and universities scaling some of this success?
Right. Well, let me just start by talking about an early program that they did, which is just a very small, modest thing, but I think it has such a sort of powerful component to it, which is to address this question of belonging. Just very briefly, Georgia, as I say, has a merit-based grant system called the Hope Scholarship, and you have to have a 3.0 GPA average in college to keep it. If first to get it and then to keep it, and it's a very tough cutoff. If you have a 2.99 or 2.98, it doesn't matter. You lose the entire pot. And Georgia State was noticing that students that had hope and then were losing it were dropping out at an alarmingly high rate. In fact, at a roughly twice the rate of students who never got the scholarship and never qualified for it in the first place. So it was a big psychological blow. It was effectively telling them, you may think you belong here, but actually you don't. And so what they did was they set up a program to give just a very modest amount of money. It wasn't enough to make up for the loss of the scholarship, but it was enough to let students think, oh, maybe I do belong here anyway. And then the secondary discovery was that what was causing them to drop out, over and above the psychological blow, was that they were thrown for a financial loop. Suddenly they were borrowing money at high rates, they were getting into credit card debt, and suddenly they couldn't hack it anymore, and they were dropping out for that reason. So they introduced financial literacy, financial counseling, and these, this had a few benefits. First of all, it made them feel they belonged, but it also made them feel that the university as an institution was looking out for them and doing their best to kind of push them forward. And over time, as the university grew and these programs got much bigger, you mentioned advising, which became proactive and it became predictive, and students would come in and look at dashboards and understand if they carried on this path, they would have this percentage chance of graduating, but if they moved into this area that played to their strengths a little more, it improved their chances by this much. All of this kind of great work, which we don't have time now to get into. But what accompanied that was very much a sense of, this is a huge campus, more than 30,000 undergraduates on the Atlanta campus. Now they have a community college network as well. And yet there's this sense of being in a net, the people, if you start to fall, people are going to catch you. They're going to say, what's going on? An advisor's going to reach out. A financial person's going to reach out and say, we noticed that you haven't paid for registration. Are you okay? Do you need to sort of apply for this program or that program? And it's very much this sense that on a huge campus, everyone is connected. And, let me just bring this forward to COVID, because they have that mentality. When COVID came along, obviously it posed unique challenges. It wasn't, in many ways, it wasn't any better at Georgia State than it was anywhere else. But what was different was this sense of, oh, we have a crisis. Well, we have a system that's primed for dealing with crises and overcoming them. This is another one. It happens to be shared by everyone rather than being an individual one. But we have networks, we have ways of getting people connected through their dashboards, through their advisors. A lot of these things can carry on offline. And it's a very powerful idea, I think, this idea that, if you don't rely on a physical space to, assume that people are connected, but actually you're used to doing the work of making those connections, just as Chynna was talking about her student-generated program. If you have an institution-generated program that, as a matter of course, is about connecting people, then when you get a big crisis, obviously you're going to have impacts. You're not going to have people meeting. You're not going to have that kind of interpersonal, valuable connection that you would have in normal times. But you do have those networks in place that can get you through, you hope, better than other places. And I think it's not about Georgia State being better than everywhere else, but I think it's about other institutions thinking we need to find ways to connect to each other, to create these networks, to create this safety net around our students so that we aren't oblivious when it happens. And we don't just rely on the anecdote of the student who got up off her feet and did brilliantly against the odds. We make sure that it's about all students, not just individual stories. And that shift in mentality, we can hope that COVID is going to get people thinking about that in a more serious way.
Thank you. That's a really nice segue, Mesmin, to my last question to you, and then we'll turn to the Q&A. What's one federal policy, or you could think about this as one thing you'd want policymakers to know to support students better, right? So it could be a policy that they enact, or just some piece of information that you wish they had and were thoughtful about when legislating, kind of post-pandemic.
Sure. I'll give two. Broderick. The first is very simple, and it's related to what Andrew was talking about, and it is that I think in our work and in what people are showing at these more specific case studies is the money, and that it really does come down to the financial support that students need. Oftentimes it's not even huge amounts, but that difference to sort of keep them going makes a huge difference in their sense that they can continue and in their actual ability to do so. So any policy that provides more complete financial support for students to be able to pursue their higher education, I think is number one. And then what I think was so remarkable about some of these particular cases is the way that they have a complete restructuring, sort of a top to bottom approach to reshaping the student experience. And any policy that's able to, and when you look at that, it's sort of daunting to think about a federal policy to approach that. So I often think about what's happening at the institutional level. So any policies that can incentivize institutions to commit those resources at all of these different levels affecting students, at the faculty development level, at the advising resources level, at the peer climate level, that you have to have some sort of push to do all of those things that's recognized and incentivized to really move some of these disparities that we're seeing. So those are my kind of two broad answers.
Thank you. Okay, I have a couple questions here. So, and this is actually related to what we were just talking about. The first one reads, mental health and well-being often get categorized as a soft or intangible outcome compared to more hard outcomes like completion, earnings, repayment, etc. However, there are efforts to have the federal government better hold colleges accountable for their outcomes beyond just these hard skills. What are the kinds of metrics the federal government should be thinking about in better measuring well-being and holding institutions accountable for those outcomes? Mesmin, I know you touched on this a little bit, but if you have additional thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hesitating because it is tricky. There are some, especially if you're looking at certain types of psychological experiences or measures that have been developed, they haven't been developed to be put into sort of like a means tested kind of framework. And that, once you start measuring for the purpose of distributing resources or of evaluating at a whole level, it can really have some perverse incentives for how it's measured and what institutions do. So just a race towards the metric, it can be, can have some unintended consequences. That being said, I do think it's a great question, and I do think that trying to at least be able to capture, in some sense, how students are doing as a whole in a more concrete way is an important goal. I don't think that we are necessarily there. I think that there are lots of smaller ways, and they're sort of localized to sort of capture what students need, how well they're doing. One of the pieces that I think that we've been doing some work on that is really essential and overlooked is actual physical health, and that the experiences that students are going through in early adulthood for most students, for many students, are actually showing negative effects on their physical health in really tangible ways in terms of disease development over time and processes like inflammation and the like. So there are a whole host of possibilities that can be measured at the physical level, at the psychological level, but there's more work, unfortunately, that I think needs to be done to provide measures that can be translated to policymakers in a really confident way at this point in time.
Andrew, any thoughts there?
And I'll just give an observation of what I've seen by talking to students and listening to their stories. And again, I want to emphasize I'm not a mental health expert in any way, but it really comes down to the sort of the incredible pressures that lower income students feel when they're going through college. I talk to people who spent time experiencing homelessness. Sleep is a huge problem for almost every one of these students that I spoke to, because they're working 2 jobs, they're trying to complete their studies, they have family responsibilities, you name it. And any one thing that can go wrong can throw their life for a complete loop, and just living with that kind of constant pressure is something that really sort of stayed with me. So then the question is, how do you alleviate that pressure to, and actually just to give another example, another student who in his 3rd year, got one infectious disease after another that just fell by, mono, and then something else. And it seems to me that if you're looking at it from a macro level, obviously everybody's life has its own pressures and its own particular challenges, but on the macro level, this is really about having to take up a challenge that is probably bigger than most Americans. People who are education experts understand this, but most Americans, I think, don't understand what it's like for a lower income student to go through college with all these pressures. And to me, the simplest way to alleviate it, obviously institutions can have counseling programs and all kinds of support systems, but ultimately you need to make college more affordable, and you need a federal government that, with the Pell Grant, just to take one example, make sure that it covers as much as it did when it was introduced in the early 70s. The amount of money coming into students has gone down, the amount of money they have to pay out has gone up, and it's on them to make up the difference. And that pressure on its own, I have to imagine, has tremendous mental health outcomes.
Yeah, thank you. So we're almost at time, but there's a great question that I think can be our last. So I will punt it to you all. It says, do each of the panelists have a specific moment where they realized there was a big need in student welfare? If so, how did it make you feel? And how did that feeling result in the actions that have made you activists or journalists reporting on this issue, or academics doing research in this space? So I'll leave you to think about that and answer in any order. Chynna?
Okay, and I hope I'm answering this correctly. But my freshman year, when I first got involved at YI, a big issue that was happening my campus and many other campuses was food insecurity. And also at the time, before they had recently passed a bill to expand health services such as Cover California to undocumented students. You had a lot of undocumented young adults in college who were going through health issues but really couldn't go to the doctor. During that time, was when I was involved with the Young Advocates program, and at the time I was seeing those issues happening on my school, and it was a huge need. At the time, I went to a rally, and I was like getting very gathered up. I was basically talking about it, talking to legislators about passing policies in order to help students with this need at the time. At the end of my freshman year, they did pass a policy where all Cal States and UCs had to put a food pantry on campus to address the need of students who needed food for food insecurity. And recently, a couple years ago, or not too long ago, they passed a policy extending Cover California to students to young adults up to age 26. But that helped a lot of college students at the time, because like I told you, a group that I was a part of a coalition I was part of, it was a big issue among college students who were undocumented, not having access to healthcare. So that's just one. Did I answer? I hope I answered.
Well, I was muted now. That's great. Andrew, Mesmin, thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's hard to isolate a specific moment. I'm going to ruminate on this question, I think, for a while, having, doing this work for some time. But I will say, I think, whether it comes from experience through education or whatnot, I will say that I think there definitely have been moments of real confirmation, and it's just so striking how study after study that we run and that others run reinforce the idea of that the students are experiencing these challenges, based on their income background at various different types of higher education institutions. And then to me, not only that they're experiencing these challenges, but that also the things that we predict would matter have really strong, really consistent effects. And so many studies that people run in psychology and in education more generally don't find, significant effects, or don't find that an experimental manipulation does anything. And then we consistently find that, being stressed out about your loans and having to think about it has this negative effect, that learning the institution has different types of financial resources for you has this positive effect, that being put into a peer community randomly assigned that's supportive has this positive effect that goes all the way to grades. Just seeing time and time again how these individual things matter, and then of course seeing the work that's looking holistically at things together has really reinforced this intuition that is built over time.
I mean, I can answer by saying that there was a specific story that I came across as I was working on the book that really sort of changed the project from something that engaged me intellectually to something that just grabbed me by the gut and wouldn't let go, which was a story from before Georgia State was successful, just a couple of years before. A music student, African-American, came from South Georgia, was not familiar with Atlanta, had spent a couple of years at a college in Savannah, and was really sort of deeply misunderstood by the music faculty. He wanted to be a musician. Found himself failing out, but not because he wasn't dedicated, but because he felt like the system was somehow stacked against him. He didn't get answers to his questions. Professors weren't getting back to him. He was, getting knocked out of ensembles that were supposed to be part of his core program, and he didn't understand why. He ended up, living in halfway houses. He was starving for months on end, just had a miserable experience. The story itself is extraordinary, and I'll cut quickly to the chase, which is, he did manage to turn himself around with the help of a specific advisor who got him onto a totally different track, different major. And, today he's a music professor in the Georgia University system, which is sort of a remarkable turnaround. But what really grabbed me was, this story, and I'm sorry I can't tell the whole thing now, but it really sort of, I was just so moved, not only listening to his story, but also talking to the counselor who had helped him, and just, thinking about this whole world that had gone on unnoticed by the institution. And what I think I took away from that, and I think what that story I hope will help others take away from it, and which, Georgia State's administrators may not have known about this specific case, but I think they took it to heart on a sort of symbolic level, which is every institution has stories like this of a student who succeeded against the odds. But what can you do so that you as an institution, first of all, stop this happening in the first place, but secondly, build a system so that everybody is included in the net that you throw out to make sure that, if a mistake gets made, it gets rectified. If somebody goes off track, somebody notices and gets them back on track before it's too late. And, that concept of the idea that it's even possible, this is a country like many parts of the Western world that's seen huge gulfs between rich and poor, increasing disparities of all kinds over the last 50, 60 years. The idea that you can reverse that, and the idea that you can start reversing it in higher education, is something that I find, very inspiring. And it's almost something that in and of itself becomes its own form of mental health counseling. If students come to a campus where they believe that others believe in them, that goes a long way to solving a lot of the other issues that inevitably arise.
Thank you. Well, we are a few minutes over time, and everyone has remained on the line, which tells me this was an incredibly engaging conversation. So I want to thank all our guests for joining us today. A special thanks to Andrew, Mesmin, and Chynna for being here. Please continue the conversation with these folks. Their Twitter handles and other contact information, along with a whole host of resources, have been flagged in the chat. And as I mentioned at the outset, we will be posting the recording of this conversation on Third Way's website later this week. So thank you all for making time for this conversation, and be well. Take care.